Standards in life are going to dictate everything that you get or don't get out of life. And if you really think about it, like if you were to buy something and it's a standard issue, what does that mean? That means that basically you're buying the base model. That's like there's no bells and whistles, nothing special about it. It's just that's the standard model, right? That's the thing that you would use to make all comparisons against. That's like the generic version of something. And whatever your personal standards are is the base from which everything else grows out of, from which everything else happens. And, when it comes to life, one of the biggest mistakes a lot of times people are making is they're not setting better standards for themselves. They might have been taught some standards as a result of, having parents or going to school or maybe going to college or working at different places or having different kinds of bosses or coaches or mentors in their lives. But a lot of times what happens is people set a standard, they reinforce it by consistently living that standard, and they stop seeing progress after a certain point. And the problem with the way life works is in order to go from the level that you're at to the next level in life, to the next level, to continue to keep progressing, you're going to need to update your standards. And so, you might currently be in a situation where every month the bills are getting paid, but you're not financially getting ahead. So your standard right now is that the bills will get paid no matter what. And if something came up in your life that, it added to your bills, even if it was hard, you would find a way to fulfill that standard because that's what you've set for yourself. Your physical health, you might be looking at, being overweight, and your standard might be that there that you don't have a standard. You might just be thinking about, well, I just live in this thing that called my body, and since I'm gonna die one day, it's not important really to do much with it. Or that your standard is you're just a normal person. You're not like one of those athletes with the crazy metabolism and all this other stuff, so you're not going to even try. And the problem is, if you set poor standards for yourself, you're going to get poor results out of life in general. And, Bob Proctor said one time on stage, he said, most people are tiptoeing through life, hoping to arrive at death unharmed. And he said it was stupid, and I'm going to repeat what he said. It is stupid to think that you can just walk through life and try not to get hurt, and then death isn't going to come for you. Death is going to come for all of us. And if there is no other chance you'll ever have to live another life, it makes sense to set the highest standards for yourself possible so that you can get the best possible life. And you have to have standards in a lot of places. And this is where I think this becomes very challenging for most people. Is life is somewhat complex. It's kind of hard. How do you come up with standards for, becoming wealthier? And why do you want to become wealthier? How do you set standards for your physical health that you're constantly physically improving? I've know guys that are in their 50s and 60s that are in better shape than 99% of everybody in the world. And they'll live to be 70, 80, 90 years old, and they'll probably still look great in their 70s, 80s, and 90s. What are good standards for being, a good partner in a marriage or a relationship? What's a good standard for being a good parent? What's a good standard for being a good member of your community, for being a good person in general, for being a good man or being a good woman, being a good steward of the planet, being X, Y, and Z? There's so many different things to consider. So people just kind of give up because nobody ever sat us down. For the most part, most people don't have a talk where their parents sit them down or somebody at school sits them down with a list and says, here are all of the areas of your life that are important, and here's how you can create good standards that are going to lead you to living a great life. And if you look at the people who are the most admired. And when I say most admired, I mean the people that we look up to, like Gandhi or Martin Luther King Jr. or the Buddha or Jesus or Muhammad or any of these other people. If you look at those people, because a lot of people get confused with this kind of envious way that people look at celebrities, and they say, oh, well, they're admired. And it's like, it's not really the same thing. Like, nobody would argue that people admire Kim Kardashian in the same light that they admire Jesus Christ. Now, there might be some similarities, but for the most part, like, there's a clear distinction between um, thinking somebody is cool and looking up to somebody reverently, in the sense of like they're a role model for my life. And if I wanted to live the highest possible be the highest possible version of myself, I would follow, Jesus, not Kim Kardashian. That's pretty obvious to anybody with an IQ above 50. It's not really hard to figure that out. But the thing is, how do you set standards in those areas of your life, in all of the areas of your life, that you are able to live in a way that people would admire you? And to be honest, if you read the work of Dr. David Buss, the kind of like the founder of evolutionary psychology, there's a few people that are part of the group of founders, if you want to say that, but he wrote the textbook on evolutionary psychology. If you look at some of what he's written in the evolutionary psychology book, The Evolution of Desire, and some of his other works, for the most part, human beings are and haven't changed genetically speaking. We haven't changed almost at all in the last, million years. Our DNA is almost identical to how it was a couple 100,000 years ago, despite the fact that the world we live in is radically different. A couple 100,000 years ago, you might have been living with a small group of people in caves or forests, and you spent most of your day walking, hunting, and chilling, like just hanging out. Like, it's radically different than the world we live in today. If you look at the work of evolutionary psychologists, it seems to suggest that for the most part, human beings are looking to be admired. They're looking to be seen as being valuable, because being valuable at an evolutionary level means that you are more likely to mate, which it means you're more likely to pass on your genetics, which means you're more likely to avoid the death of the basic version of yourself, being your DNA, your genetics. And so if you're trying to live up to a standard where you're going to be admired, which means you're going to be able to continue yourself into the next generation and ideally for generations to come, it starts by identifying, first of all, the areas of life that are important to have standards in, and at least starting there. And I mean, it's, if you want to make it really simple, it's, standards around your fitness, your physical health, standards around your finances, how much money you're making, how much money you're investing, how much money your investments are producing for you. Your family and your friends, or your friendships, your relationships, the people that are around you, the people that you become not attached to, but you become connected with, and you form deep connections with. And then, your actual fulfillment, the level of joy that you feel on a daily basis. And I use the word fulfillment specifically because if you look at the definition of fulfillment, there's two definitions of fulfillment, and one is, the actual process of doing something. Like if you work at an Amazon fulfillment center, as an example, you are packaging things and sending it out. But fulfillment is also the end result of that. So you could consider fulfillment also when that customer receives the package. And in your personal life, it is both of those things. You don't get a lot of times unfortunately, you don't actually get the biggest spike of excitement and long-term joy from something happening. It's usually the process of doing that where you'll find the most joy. It's kind of like skateboarding. When you're trying to learn how to do a new trick in skateboarding, you're going to have a lot more joy for a longer period of time when you're learning how to do the trick, because it takes longer than the first time you actually accomplish that trick. And then once you've accomplished that trick, you might feel a really sharp spike of excitement and fulfillment and joy, but it's very short-lived in comparison to the amount of time it takes to actually accomplish that. And life is exactly the same as that. There's a very long period of time it takes to accomplish goals, if they're meaningful goals, compared to the joy you feel when you actually accomplish it. It's kind of like buying a new car. You might be really excited for like a week or two, but it took maybe months or even years to save up the money to buy that specific fancy car or whatever it is that you really like. And so when it comes to setting standards in these 4 areas of life, if you get this wrong, which the most important thing you can do is to consider what happens if I get this wrong. And there are so many people. You can look around. I mean, look at the place where you work. Maybe you work with some people who are 20 or 30 or 40 years older than you are. Would you trade your life for theirs? Do you feel like they got things right in a way where they are living the best damn life they could possibly live? Or does it seem like they've made a lot of mistakes? They have a lot of regrets, and if possible, they wish they could turn things around and change things. And if you don't have people around you like that in your workplace, look around you when you go out in public. How many people are actually smiling when they're doing anything? When you go to the grocery store, are people actually looking like they're really living a great life, or does it look like they're just kind of having to do whatever they have to do? Do they, are people smiling when they're driving their cars? Are people smiling when they're working out? Are people smiling when they're doing any of these things? It's a pretty easy way to tell. And maybe that's not enough to actually, translate into you taking some kind of action. It's worth asking people. You see, a homeless guy on the street, ask, hey, what happened, man? How did you end up here? What's going on? Like, why are you out here? Like, you got all your arms, you got all your legs, your brain works. Why are you here on the street? What happened? And they'll tell you. They'll say, well, this thing happened to me, and then I started, shooting up heroin, and next thing I know, I lost my house, and then nobody wants to talk to me, and blah, blah, blah. And you can see that their lack of having a standard for how to deal with the trouble of the world led them to making a series of bad decisions that led to them having to deal with the negative results of those actions. It goes literally back to just basic science. Everybody learned this stuff in school. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. If you start shooting heroin, you might feel really freaking good for a while, and then you come down. And then you want more, and then you want more. And so you start spending more and more money, and then your health deteriorates, your mental health deteriorates, your relationships deteriorate, your ability to produce an income deteriorates. Everything goes with it. So if you don't already have examples that you've seen that are impactful enough for you to make a decision, you need to get them. And the reason for this is because Human Beings is a great book by Nobel Prize winners. I know their names. Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky. They wrote a book called Thinking Fast and Slow. And one of the things that they discovered through all of their clinical trials that people are twice as likely to move away from pain as they are to move towards some kind of perceived pleasure or joy or happiness. So you need the negative examples in order to take action more so than you need positive aspirations. In fact, the only people that don't benefit from this are people who are very high in psychopathy, because people who are higher in psychopathy typically are not really motivated by fear because they don't feel fear, or at least they feel significantly less fear of negative results as a result of being higher in psychopathy. Um, and so if you're a normal person, your normal levels of psychopathy, meaning it's either low or not high, um, you need those negative examples more than you need these positive aspirations or even positive examples, because most of the time that you're reacting, you're going to be reacting as a result to the world in this mindset of trying to avoid pain. And so these negative examples are going to lead you to then figuring out what kinds of standards you need to set. And so when it comes to, like, as an example, we'll start with just your physical fitness. Right now, if you took off all your clothes and stood in front of a mirror and did the Arnold test, Arnold says, it's simple. If it jiggles, it's fat. If you jumped up and down in front of the mirror and things were jiggling around that you didn't want jiggling around, like your stomach or your legs or your butt or other parts of your body, your current standard for physical fitness is that it is unimportant what you look like. Now, a great motivational speaker who passed away, Jim Rohn, said, God judges on the inside, but people judge on the outside. If you live in a competitive world where people are going to judge you, regardless of whether or not you think that's right or wrong, let's just live in the real world. Forget how you feel about it. Forget how I feel about it, whether or not that's the right way to be from an ethical standpoint. Let's just look at reality the way it is. If people are going to judge you based off the outside, what is your physical body telling people? If you're unhealthy, if you're overweight, if you're, not clean shaven, if you don't have, if you have hair, if it's unkept, or if it's bright blue or something else, what is that telling other people? And you might say, well, my hair shouldn't matter. Who cares what you think about whether or not it matters? It is going to send a message. If you have blue hair, as an example, it's going to send a message that you are kind of outside the spectrum of what people tend to expect for normal. There are very few people who wear expensive suits, that drive expensive cars, that live in big-ass houses, that have blue hair. That doesn't mean it doesn't happen, and it doesn't mean your hair is going to determine whether or not that can happen to you, but it will determine how many of the people who live in those kinds of houses, drive those kinds of cars, and can afford, multi-$1,000 suits will actually listen to you. And you might say that's not fair. Maybe you're right, but that's the real world. If you're overweight, are people going to really, judge you on that? I can tell you personally, when I'm talking to people, even in a business context, if they can't even keep themselves in physical health, and something about what they're saying to me sounds off, I'm going to judge them more negatively on what they're saying just because they're not in good physical shape. And it isn't fair. It's probably not ethically right, but that's what's going to happen, because as human beings, we are going to judge people because we're trying to do the math on, is this smart? Is it smart to move forward with this decision? Is it a good idea? And so with your physical health right now, your standard might be, okay, it's not important. But if you're trying to have some kind of success in terms of, like, I don't know, getting married, attracting a mate, having children, having healthy children, living a great life. It's very hard to live a great life when you have diabetes and you have to check your blood sugar multiple times a day and you have to give yourself insulin shots. It's very hard to live a good life when you have heart disease. It's very hard to live a good life and enjoy your kids and your spouse when you don't have enough energy to run around all day, or you can't keep up with them because you're overweight. And that all starts with your standard. And so when it comes to your standard for your physical health, if you are overweight right now, you need to address what it is that allowed you to think that that was okay. And you need to figure out where that came from. Maybe your family are all overweight. Maybe all the people you hang out with are all overweight. Maybe you have some negative associations with people that are in great physical shape. You might have this idea like, well, they're athletes. You know, I'm not a weightlifter, or I'm not a football player, I'm not a soccer player. I don't maybe, you really disliked somebody at one point in your life that they were in great physical shape, and so now you associate being in great physical shape with being an asshole. The thing is, you have to be able to pick this stuff apart. A big part of the reason why I tell people they should be spending time meditating every day is because you need time. You need to be able to sort through some of this stuff in your mind and figure out where you've gone wrong. The only way you're going to be able to figure this stuff out if you're headed in the wrong direction is you need to go back through your life and figure out, where did I make a left turn when I should have made a right turn in my life? Where did I come up with this dumb idea that being in good physical shape means you're an asshole, or that being in good physical shape is reserved for special people with great genetics and not me? Or where did I come up with this or that idea about this thing? So you're going to have to do a little bit of introspection. If you look at what, the Buddha said, the Buddha basically said, sit on your backside and go inside, go do some personal introspection. You have to think through some of these ideas you have. And this might take some time, because a lot of times our ideas about the world aren't intelligently formed. We're not sitting down and thinking through things. We're typically responding to the world and then repeating that thought enough times until it becomes our baseline standard. So with your physical fitness, with your physical health, a good way of thinking about this is, okay, what don't I want? Most people, if you ask 100 people on the street, 100 people are going to tell you, no, I do not want to have diabetes. They're going to say, I don't want to have to check my blood sugar levels multiple times a day. I don't want to have to shoot up insulin into my stomach. I don't want to have this higher risk of all these other problems as a result. But why is it that most people don't do anything? Well, their standard isn't that. It's not enough to just say, I don't want something, or I want something. If we got everything we wanted, the world would actually probably be a pretty miserable place. We'd all be pretty unhappy as a general rule. You don't get what you want, and you also don't avoid what you don't want. It comes as a result of your standard. And so when you're looking at this, you have to then think, okay, well, what do I actually want? So if you want to be in good physical health, you want to enjoy, like if you want to, a lot of people think this is like something that, I know for a long time I thought this. A lot of people think that it's normal to wake up feeling bad. For most of my life, from the time I was young, maybe like 10 or 11 years old, maybe 12 years old, until I was like 26, 27, I never woke up feeling good. I always woke up feeling like just total garbage. And around the time I was 20, I would say 26 years old, maybe 27, so 5 or 6 years ago, I started waking up earlier in the morning. I started eating, like I stopped eating late in the day, because I was eating a bodybuilding type diet where I would eat 6 times a day. So I was eating every 3 hours while I was awake. And I started changing my diet, and next thing I know, I would wake up and I felt good. I would wake up earlier too. I was waking up at like 4 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning sometimes. Now my average time I wake up is 3:30 in the morning, and I wake up at 3:30 and I feel really good. Most people don't even believe that's possible. And I know I didn't even know that was a reality for anyone in the world. And what happens is, as you start figuring out what you really want, you can start setting better standards for yourself, because it's like there's a roadmap to get to anything you want out of life. When it comes to your physical health, that could literally just be, okay, every day I need to eat X amount of calories, and that has to be a minimum of this many grams of protein, this many grams of fat, this many grams of carbohydrates. And that should be from, healthy foods, and I should be moving my body. On average, if you look back through human history, human beings, for the majority of history as far as we know it, it's estimated that human beings would walk anywhere from 10 to 15 miles per day every day of their lives. And so if you're looking at your health, that might be a good place to start. Okay, I should be walking, or not 10 miles, I'm sorry, 10,000 to 15,000 steps per day, which is the equivalent of like 5 to about 7.5, 8 miles per day. So if your health is out of whack, you might just say, okay, my new standard is that no matter what happens, every day I am going to walk 10,000 steps. And you start doing that. And then you say, okay, my new standard is producing this kind of result. So as a result of looking at those results, I am now going to set another standard that now that I'm less fat, I want to be strong. I want to be able to physically be capable of defending myself if something bad were to happen. So I'm going to start taking karate classes, or I'm going to start, taking up boxing or self-defense of some way, shape, or form. So what happens is you set an initial standard that improves your quality of life in that domain. So your physical health is just one part of that. Then you set a new standard for your finances. You say, okay, my bills always get paid, but if I look at how much money it's going to require, I need to be able to retire for 30, 40, 50 years, I'm not on track. On average, and this is just based off of a reasonable amount of research I did as a life insurance agent about 8 years ago. On average, one person needs about $2.5 to $3.5 million at 65 years old in order to retire for 30 years. That means that money will produce enough income as a result of being invested in something like the S&P 500, that'll produce enough income that you can live off of it and take some money out of that to live off of about $60,000 to $72,000 a year for 30 years. Now, that's obviously assuming you have a house that's already paid off, so you don't have a mortgage every month, and all you're paying for is like basic expenses like electricity, food, water, taxes, health insurance, so on. So you might look at where you're at right now and say, okay, I'm planning on retiring at 65. I'm not on track to having $2.5 to $3.5 million invested by that point. So you have to set a new standard. Okay, my standard is that by the time I retire, I'm going to have this much money available to me. And my standard for myself in order to accomplish that goal is that every month I pay my bills and I invest X dollars per month. And that's going to depend on doing some math. And you can see, the problem, and I said this at the beginning of this video, is nobody sat us down with a list of these things. There's so many different aspects of life. I mean, you could start with these 4, right? Your physical fitness, your finances, your family and friend relationships, and your fulfillment. And fulfillment could also be like your charity work, like what you do to improve the planet or the community or whatever, your church, whatever it is for you. But nobody sat us down and walked us through, like, what are good standards for finances? What are good standards for, having a good marriage? And having a good marriage, each of these has its own subfacets, right? So having a good marriage is, how often are you talking to your significant other? I'm just going to use your wife because I'm a male. So as a standard, how often are you talking to your wife about how she feels? How often are you talking to her about what you guys can do to improve your relationship? How often are you talking to her about your guys' goals and future together? I think if there's a great book on relationships called The 7 Keys to Making Marriage Work. The guy who wrote this book has done the most hands-on studies with married couples out of anybody in the world. And a good standard might be, how many books on relationships are you reading? And I think, the thing that causes a lot of problems in marriages is people get caught up in all the emotional good stuff, all of the like feel good stuff about relationships, that they fail to plan the future. They think love is just this random spark of excitement that happens through, divine will of God, and that they don't have to do anything afterwards. And they're in order to maintain any kind of relationship, you have to do a certain amount of maintenance work. That means you're going to have to be talking to your spouse about your future every week. It means you're going to have to be thinking through, like, okay, who's doing what here? What are your responsibilities? What are mine? A lot of this like talk in the mainstream media about there being no such thing as gender roles is so wrong and stupid, because the thing is, people have to know what their role is in a relationship. And biologically speaking, we are exactly the same as we were 200,000 years ago. Women, for the most part, on average, this isn't every woman, this isn't every man, but women on average are going to be drawn towards fulfilling specific roles in a relationship, and the same with men. It's just part of our genetics. It's hardwired into us physically. There's an insane amount of research that shows that this is all true. It doesn't matter what you see in social media and on the news. A good standard might be that you don't watch the news, because you don't want reality to be out of sync. You don't want to be out of sync with reality as a result of all these people that are saying all these things that are completely unfounded in the real world. So you have to think through your every part of your life and set better standards. And the process of setting the standards is the easiest part, because all you have to do is look at what you want and then say, okay, in order for me to be that kind of person, in order to me to be the kind of person that deserves that kind of physical health, that deserves those kinds of finances, those kinds of, family relationships and fulfillment, I'm going to have to do X, Y, and Z. That's the easy part. The hard part is then you have to break it down into a daily practice. It has to be something that you do every day. And there's been some great research on this recently. In 2018, they studied how effective mental rehearsal was for Olympic skiers. And they did the study with both Olympic skiers and monkeys, because they built a software that they could connect to the brains of the people to be able to monitor what was going on in their brains as they performed different tasks. So they were able to use this software as a proxy for normal mental rehearsal. And mental rehearsal is exactly what it sounds like. They would think through doing something and imagine themselves actually doing it in the real world, but it was all going on inside their minds. And the program that they had set up was, they basically had set up a program where things in the computer would only happen as a result of them mentally rehearsing those things happening in the computer. And so they found through doing these studies, and I shouldn't say they confirmed through doing these studies that what they had found in other studies, almost 200 studies before this, that mentally rehearsing significantly improves performance. So if you're trying to set a new standard and you're like, well, how do I make this happen? How do I build this habit? I'm already super busy. I already have so much stuff on my plate. How do I now set this new standard and this new behavior and then live up to it? The way that you do it is by mentally rehearsing it every day and then actually doing it in the moment. And so if your new standard is that you're the kind of person that exercises, every day, maybe that's just walking to start, is I'm going to walk 10,000 steps every day. You're going to mentally rehearse that on a daily basis. I find that this is really beneficial to do first thing in the morning, because it helps to center you and align you with your goals before you get kind of caught up in all of the day-to-day stuff that the world is going to throw at you. But you could do it at nighttime too. You could do it in the morning and at night. And what you do is you literally just sit down. You just, do this in a quiet space, maybe throw on some really chill music, nothing with like any words or singing or anything like that in it. Or just, some rain sounds or something like that. And for 5 to 10 minutes, all you do is just think through doing that thing. So using the example of walking 10,000 steps, you might envision the place where you're going to walk. If that's, like where I live, we have these really steep hills because we live in the hills, and the condominium complex we're in is built all the way down this, I shouldn't say all the way down, but like 3/4 of the way down this hill. So we have these really steep hills. So if I was trying to do this myself and I wasn't already walking like 10,000 steps a day, I would sit down, I'd set a timer. There's actually a great tool called Insight Timer with sounds like rain sounds and stuff. You can just set a 10-minute timer in there, and there'll be a ding at the end letting you know it's over. And I would just mentally imagine myself, like from where I was sitting, getting up, walking out this room, walking out my front door, walking up the stairs, walking down the stairs, walking up the hill, walking down all the way to the bottom of the hill, taking a break to drink some water, walking back up to where I live, and then going all the way to the top of the hill, walking back around and going in and out of the different streets. I would visualize in my mind this whole thing happening. And the reason you would want to do this when you're first trying to build this new habit of living up to that standard, the reason why you want to do this is because you're going to fail sometimes in this process. When you're first setting a new standard for yourself and you're first building a new habit, what's going to happen is a lot of the negative mental associations you have aren't going to just disappear. Most people, you're not just going to have this realization like that's wrong and then never do it again. You're going to slip up. You're going to find there's a thing called decision fatigue. You make worse decisions. Like over the course of a day, the more decisions you make, the lower the quality of decision, especially as it gets later on in the day. That's why you're typically going to have a harder time not eating ice cream at 10 o'clock at night as opposed to 10 o'clock in the morning. Same thing with drinking and drugs and everything else. So when you're trying to build this new habit, this process of mental rehearsing is you basically undoing all of this negative garbage that's led up to the current standard of living you have. And this mental rehearsal process is also going to help keep you mentally living through that process and seeing the results of that before you'll actually see it in real life. When it comes to everything in real life, it's going to take more action than you think to get everything. Like your money situation, you're going to need to work a lot harder than you think to take that to the next level. Your physical shape, I can tell you as somebody who's lost 45 pounds over the last 14 months, your physical shape, even if you're already really well educated. I mean, 10 years ago, I was a personal trainer for a couple of years. I worked in gyms for like almost 4 years. I read about fitness. I read about diet, all this stuff all the time. It still took a year and 2 months to lose 45 pounds. I thought I could have done it in like 6 to 8 months. So everything's going to take longer than you think. And a big part of the challenge is keeping your mind in the right place so that your actions keep on track with that, especially when you do have slip-ups. Sometimes you're not going to eat right. Sometimes you're going to fail to hit your goal. Sometimes you're going to fail to fulfill that habit. That mental rehearsal, that process of repeatedly doing it, what you're doing is you're ingraining that idea into your mind as your new identity. Because the second part of having great personal standards is that your identity is going to determine whether or not you live up to those standards. You might set a standard and say, well, I'm the kind of person who makes $10,000 a month and invests $5,000 a month. Your real world, you might try and do the right things and you keep sabotaging yourself. And you're like, why do I keep failing? Like, I'm trying my best. I'm not getting there. Well, whoever it is you think you are you're only ever going to be able to live up to the potential of the person that you think you are. I'm going to say that again because there's a lot to unpack inside of what I just said. You're only ever going to live up to the potential of the person that you think you are. And the problem is most people think too little of themselves. Most people don't realize how much more they're capable of because they're never questioning why they think they are who they are to begin with. And so your identity has to change. And there's a great quote. You would have to Google this. I'm not really sure who said it, but I think it was Goethe, the guy who wrote the play Faust, about the guy who sold his soul to the devil. I think he said, before you can do it, you have to be it. And so before you can, before you can have millions of dollars, you have to become a millionaire. And in order to become a millionaire, that doesn't mean that you just have the money. It means that you are the person that has that kind of money. You are the person that produces that result. Like, in order to be the kind of person that can lift 500 pounds, you have to first believe that it's possible and then live in a way that you're going to prove that to be the case. So if you wanted to lift 500 pounds as an example, you would start by saying, okay, well, I need to start exercising regularly before I could do that. So maybe I can only do 100 pounds, and then it'll be 150, and then 200, and 225, and 280, and 350, and 400, and 425, and 450, and 500. You're going to have to be that person, meaning you're going to have to believe that you are that kind of person, and then do the things that that kind of person would do. And so your identity, who you think you are, is going to determine whether or not you live up to the new standards that you set for yourself. And I said this in a video that I released on TikTok and YouTube Shorts and Instagram, but you have to understand, it's so important to understand, there is somebody far less intelligent than you that already has everything you want. There's somebody far less intelligent than you that's already in the physical shape you want to be in. They already have somebody else, totally dumb, total clod, doesn't have a smart cell in their body, already makes 10 times more money than you. Somebody who's got better relationships, somebody who is happier. All of these things, there's at least one, if not 100 or 1,000 people in the world less intelligent than you that already has that thing that you want, that already has that standard of life, that already has that quality of life. So if that's the case, which it is, by the way, if you want to make more money, go to some seminars and go to some like in-person meetups and meet a lot of people. You'll find somebody you're like, I can't believe this guy's making $10,000, $50,000, $100,000, $1 million a month. It's insane. You'll find somebody that you will be like, wow, if they can do it, I can do it. I'm far more intelligent. I'm far better looking. I'm far whatever. So if you're struggling to accomplish the things that you want, even though you've identified a better standard to try to live up to, because you keep self-sabotaging, it's because you haven't allowed yourself to fully embrace a new identity. And your identity is not set in stone. Your identity is something that you are capable of changing, because your identity is just something that you've basically created as a result of all of the things you've ever thought and experienced and how you've reacted to the world around you. A good example of this is, why is it that people like me can go from being on drugs almost every single day, heavily drinking, I mean like literally like 10 to 20 drinks a day, smoking 2 packs of cigarettes a day, smoking weed all day. Why is it that somebody like me can go from doing that for 8 years to just not ever doing it again? Why is it that somebody like me can go from making no dollars to making 6 figures, to making mid 6 figures, to like making 7 figures? Why is it that people are able to do that? It's because they change who they think they are, and then they reinforce it with their new standards and their new behaviors. And then those new standards and behaviors lead to the outside world then verifying that they are in fact that person. And so if you're failing because you keep self-sabotaging, what you need to do is you need to say, you need to realize that you are the person that you decide you are. If you want to be more confident, you might have to learn a little bit of like, well, what does that look like? How do confident people act? And then you have to mental rehearse how that would look like for you, and then you have to go out and actually do it. And you have to do it, and you have to do it, and you have to do it, and you have to do it. You literally are just going to have to a certain extent, brainwash yourself the same exact way the news and social media and everything else in the world does this. When you went to school and you learned how to read and write, they didn't teach you the alphabet one time. They would practice the alphabet with you every single day, over and over and over again. Then they would teach you short words: cat, hat, dog, frog, jog, bog. They would go through teaching you all these little words, and then they'd get a little bit bigger and a little bit more complex and a little bit more and a little bit more. That process of repeatedly learning this, repeatedly practicing it, repeatedly reinforcing it over and over and over again. And then if you notice, the education system is a little bit smart in the way that they do this in the earlier grades. They do it over and over and over again, and then on a weekly basis or a bi-weekly basis, they have a test. Tests in real life are you sitting down and saying, okay, how much of what I wanted to learn and incorporate into my life over the last week did I actually do? And then you sit down and you test yourself on it. You review. You go back and you say, okay, well, I learned this and I did this way, and I did it this way, and then I did these things, and then this happened. And then you can look at it and you can grade yourself, and you can say, okay, I would give myself a C+. If I'm going to be fair, this last week I failed in these points and I didn't do this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write down 100 times I am a millionaire. I'm going to write down 100 times I am physically perfect. I'm going to write down whatever it is that your standard is for yourself. Obviously, like, physically perfect is kind of stupid because you'll never get there, but you'll always be closer if you're at least working. So having that process is how we learned how to read and write, how we learned how to use our language. So in your own life, when you find that you're not living up to the new identity that you have to have in order for those standards to become the way that you actually live your life and the way that you actually experience the reality that you live inside of, you have to make sure that you have this process of actually going through and reviewing. And I do this on a daily basis. I look at everything that I had on my list of things to do and my schedule for the day, and I say, okay, how would I rate my progress? How would I rate my efficiency? How would I rate my attention? Was I focused, or was I really distracted? When was I really distracted? When was I, not getting things done? When was this happening? And then on a weekly basis, I'm looking back through my week. I've got a little notebook here. I've been day trading for a little over a year. I have a little notebook here every single day. I'm writing in this book. I'm writing down what trades I'm taking, when I'm taking those trades, why I'm taking those trades, how I'm feeling about the trade. Writing when I sold the trade, why I sold it, what I was feeling, what was going on, what was changing. Then I'm writing a little review. I can go back at the end of the week and I can look through all of that and I can identify where there were errors in my judgment. I can identify why I did things and what frame of mind I was in when I was doing them. And then I can say, okay, this was obviously incorrect. So this next time this situation comes up, here's what I'm going to do instead. You can't correct the errors of a bad identity if you don't look back and see what that identity produced for you. So, Tony Robbins has a great example that he uses for this. He says, people try to quit smoking, and sometimes they're even successful for 3 months, 4 months, 6 months, 9 months, and they end up going back to smoking. They don't go back to it because it's such a great thing that everybody should be smoking. They know that they shouldn't be smoking. They know it's not good for them. They know that they don't want to, but they have this identity. Well, I've always been a smoker, so I want to quit, but I've always been a smoker. I'm just a smoker. So their identity is that they're somebody who smokes cigarettes. And until that identity changes, that they're the kind of person that would never touch a cigarette, they'll never be successful in quitting. And I can tell you, as somebody who's gone through a major identity shift in my own personal life, there are things that, 15 years ago, there are things that I did 15 years ago that it seems to me almost as if like I'm actually remembering somebody else's life. Like it's so different from the kind of person that I am today and from the standards that I have for myself today. It's so different that it's I almost feel like dissociated from it. I almost feel like it's not even part of my own personal history because I'm not the person that I was 15 years ago. I'm not the person I was even, I would say, 6 or 7 years ago. I feel like even 6 or 7 years ago, there's a lot of mistakes and there's a lot of errors in my way of thinking that I wouldn't make today as a result of consistently pushing for better standards because I am aware of the fact that like I want my life to be as comfortable of an uptrend as possible. A lot of people's lives go up and down a lot like this. Look, this is really bad. If your life goes up to like a 10 and then down to 1 and up to a 9 and down to a 2 and up to 10 and down to 1, if it's going up and down like that a lot, you're going to have a really hard, stressful life. You're going to feel overwhelmed a lot. And the thing is, if you're doing something that's driving you from a 10 all the way down to a 1, you're having a major error in your way of thinking and your judgment and your standards. And so if you're going to make your life great in any way, shape, or form, start first of all by identifying, like, okay, what are the things that I would actually want to have? Do you want to be able to retire one day? Okay, well, you're going to need $2.5 to $3.5 million on the low end to have about $60,000 a year to live off of. What do you need to be able to do that? And you're going to have to do some math. Do you want to be able to enjoy your life when you retire? Or do you want to be, fat and on diabetes medication, on insulin, doing all this other stuff? So you have to first identify in the future what you want your life to look like. And then you have to reverse engineer that into, okay, what does that mean that I need to be doing on a daily basis? Who do I need to be on a daily basis? And you're going to say, okay, in order to deserve to retire with that amount of money, I'm going to need to be the kind of person that on a daily basis is making an extra, whatever, $100 a day, an extra $50 a day. Technically, most people, if you're investing at like a 10% return, you could, inflation and interest rates and everything else will kind of screw this up, depending on what happens the next, 20 years. But let's just say inflation stays about what it is right now, and you're averaging 12% returns, and you might do the math. You say, oh, okay, I need to make an extra, let's call it $2,000 a month. Okay, that's an extra $100 a day, 5 days a week. So in order to do that, I'm going to need to do X, Y, and Z. So now you have a game plan. Then from that game plan, you have to reinforce that your new identity is you're the kind of person that, makes more money than they need to pay their bills. I'm the kind of person that always makes an extra $2,000 a month. And that identity might be great. That standard might be great for you for a while. The cool thing is what you'll find is when you get into the process of creating this new identity for yourself and improving on your identity and then setting these new standards and then living up to them, what you'll find is your level of joy and fulfillment in life, that fourth part, that continues to go up as a result because every day you're living more in alignment with your real potential, real world potential, not your identity-based potential. And as a result of, accomplishing more things along the way, your self-esteem is going to improve, your confidence is going to improve. And, if you're a young person and you haven't accomplished much and you don't have high self-esteem and you're not very confident, that's okay. If you haven't accomplished anything and you're really confident, you're kind of an idiot. And anybody that meets you and gets to know you is going to know that you're an idiot because you don't have anything to be confident about. You should have to start to a certain extent when you're young. you should be very humble. You should be humble in the sense, not that you're like self-deprecating, oh, I'm just not worth that much, I'm not that great or anything. You should be humble in the sense that you are open to learning as much as possible from the people that have the things that you want to get out of life. And so you have to get this thing around standards right. You have to get it right if you want to be able to do these things. And look around you. The majority of people right now are one paycheck away from losing it all. Is that a good standard? Is that a standard you want for yourself? If you lose your job today, in 2 months you don't have a house anymore, that's a poor standard for financial health. That is a poor standard to have. A better standard might be, I am the kind of person who always has 12 months worth of expenses saved in an account that's very liquid, that I can pull money out of it when I need it. I'm the kind of person that has income from properties or stocks and bonds or whatever. I'm the kind of person that has passive income coming in that can meet my monthly expenses forever if anything happens to me or my job. So you have to find ways to set new standards, and it isn't that hard. It just takes sitting down and really thinking through, okay, what don't I want out of life, and what kind of person doesn't have to experience those things? Well, people who have 12 months worth of expenses set aside don't have to worry about losing their houses if they lose their job. People who, have passive income coming in from properties or stocks or cryptocurrency or NFTs or whatever. People who, on a regular basis are building up some other source of revenue, some other source of income. What kinds of people never have to deal with, being diabetic? Well, people that exercise regularly, people that don't consume a lot of sugar, people that don't, spend a lot of time looking at, TVs right before they go to sleep, and so on. Those realizations, really, it starts by setting a new standard, and setting that standard, you have to look forward and think, what don't I want? And start from there. That'll drive 100% of people more than thinking, well, I would really like to have X, Y, and Z. I would really like to have $1 million. Okay, but you don't know what you would do with $1 million, so there's probably a reason why you're not getting it. If you don't know what you're going to do with it, if you're not the kind of person that has plans for utilizing $1 million effectively, you're never going to have it. You have to be the kind of person that thinks these things through. And so when you're setting your standards, first of all, you need to identify the kind of life that you actually want. And then you have to identify the kinds of people that don't get that life. And then you have to model the people who do get that life. And I would recommend, and I got this from one of my mentors, a guy named Ty Lopez. I've worked with him for 4 years now. I've been learning from him for 6, almost 7 years. One of the things he says is go straight to the top. You don't have to want to be like Jeff Bezos, but you could probably learn a lot about money from him. The same thing with Warren Buffett. The same thing with his partner, Charlie Munger. The same thing with Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak and Bill Gates and all these other people, Carlos Slim, Bernard Arnault. There's so many different people. Go straight to the top, because you don't need to necessarily get what they got, but if you learn from them and you practice what they do to get what they got, you're going to get way closer to them, and you're probably going to exceed your goals. And when you can exceed your goals, it's going to show you that there's always more. There's always more that you're capable of. There's always more that you can do. And if you're trying to live a good life, you're going to have to always be growing. And having standards that allow you to grow is one of the simplest ways to make sure that, that curve of your life, instead of going up and down a lot, it's a lot smoother and progressively up. And if you look at the data, the majority of people become less happy as they get older. So I would recommend starting today, no matter where you are. You could be 20 years old, you could be 50 years old. Start looking at the world around you and saying, do I want my life to look the way these people's lives look? in 10 years, 20 years, 50 years? Or is there something better that I would prefer? And how am I going to get that? And then start building new standards for yourself and then reinforce it every single day. If you have a standard right now that it's not important to be honest all the time and you're lying about little things, you're going to have to go back to people after you just said some stupid little lie to them and correct yourself. Hey, I'm sorry. I was telling you it was 13. It was actually 11. I don't know why I said it. I just had a brain fart. And then you get in the habit of doing that over and over and over again. Eventually, you'll stop lying to people. You just start telling people the truth up front, even when it's uncomfortable, especially when it's uncomfortable. That's when it matters the most. So start setting new standards for yourself. If you're trying to do this in a way that's simple, you want to make this as easy as possible. Maybe you feel like you're off by a lot in a lot of areas of your life. I would recommend just use the 4 things I just gave you. Start, first of all, with your physical fitness. You cannot live a great life if you don't feel good. If you don't feel great, you're not going to be great. So start with your physical fitness, then go to your finances. Finances are right up there. You're not going to have great relationships if you're not able to pay the bills, right? People are going to be really stressed out and struggling and arguing and having problems if they're not paying the bills. So then go into your family and friend relationships and your community, and then go into your personal fulfillment. What are you doing that makes you feel good about your impact on the world? Are you going out of your way to try and help people? Are you donating to charities that, help people or animals or whatever? Are you doing things that, lead to you feeling like your contribution to yourself and the rest of the planet is important? Just use those 4 measures. It's an easy place to start because you can get a little bit of progress. You can set these standards. You can start seeing the results of those standards, and you can very quickly improve those standards a lot. As somebody who, going back to physical, because I think it's one of the easiest places to look at one point I was 45 pounds, technically 50 pounds, 55 pounds overweight. I got injured. I got sick. I had literally almost a year and a half that I was just in the worst shape of my life. I just felt terrible because of all of the stuff that happened that was out of my control. I didn't, it's not something I planned on happening, and it's not something that I did well with. And, I had to set standards for myself. Okay, even if I don't feel well, I'm not going to be eating poorly. Even if I don't feel well, I'm not going to be drinking. Even if I don't feel well, I'm going to make sure that I'm at least getting X amount of steps in per day. Even if I don't feel well, even if I'm not happy, even if it's raining, even if the bills aren't getting paid, even if this happens, even if whatever happens in the world, I'm always going to get at the very least, this much done, because that is my standard for myself. Because I have to make sure that this body lasts me. I need my body to be strong. I need it to work well for a long time so that I can live a good life where I'm able to enjoy having kids, having grandkids, contributing to charity, traveling the world. I want to be 80, 90 years old and have young people looking at me and thinking to themselves, wow, I can't wait till I'm in my 80s or 90s and I'm able to look like that guy and I'm able to feel like that guy. There's now a roadmap that I have. I can see in the future that it's possible for me to be able to be in great physical shape and to feel good and live well at 80 and 90 years old. Most people think it's impossible. Most people don't see it enough to even really for it to register in their mind. Most elderly people are elderly and in convalescent and things like this as a result of having poor standards for their health. Most mental decline in old age comes as a result of just not paying attention to the body that they live in. And so start with those 4 things. Set new standards, reinforce them with mental rehearsal, and then doing it every time. And always remember, there's somebody that is less intelligent than you that has already accomplished everything that you hope to accomplish in your life. And how you do anything is how you do everything.